It's been a long journey. I can't say that I am there yet. I want to be, and I'm working on it. But to say that I have achieved all I have ever wanted in this life is something that I cannot yet say. I don't know what I want. All I know is that I want Jesus more than anything in my entire life, past, present, and future put together. I want Jesus like I have never wanted anyone before. And it shows. I have realized I want this for you. And this is the reason for this commentary. My journey to know God through His Son has been tumultuous. It's been a roller coaster ride of highs and lows, and all of this has been because of Him. Now, I understand that our Father wants so much more for us than what we are willing to achieve for ourselves. But for goodness to be seen, felt, and appreciated, we need to see, feel, and appreciate the bad. This is what I have learned. Nothing is happenstance. Nothing in my life or yours happens without God knowing and without His approval. This is because you and me, we were all predestined. Yes, that is scriptural. When I read this in Scripture, this gave me extreme encouragement. Now, I know I've read this before, but had I known and understood it back then, in a time of my life when I needed to hear it the most, I wouldn't have received the important message. And that also goes along with this journey we set ourselves on. This journey begins with a readiness to receive the word as God Himself presented it. The journey to know God is healthy, and it is tumultuous, and there is ups and downs. It is a rocky road. It is a narrow road. It is a road that is like a roller coaster ride, and some days you just want to get off. But this journey allows us to mature. Maturity speaks about understanding and patience. And in my journey, I hope to impart that to you. Wisdom for your growth so you don't have to endure as long as you have to. They say a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. My journey of self-discovery began when for the second time within my then 13-year marriage, I discovered my husband's affair. This time around, God had already prepared me as God allowed me to go looking. Now, I always say, be careful what you wish for or what you look for, because you just might find it. And you might not like what you find. Well, I found it. Quite easily, actually, and I did not like what I found. But I'm a truth seeker. And I personally would always rather know than not know. Now, I don't know if my husband didn't think he would get caught, or maybe he just didn't care. Had God not prompted me, I would never have known. I was complacent in my marriage, going through the motions, living day to day as a homeschooling mom, a caretaker of the household needs and finances. And when my husband came home from work, I felt it was my quote-unquote duty as a woman to fulfill his needs as his wife. I had lost myself. I was lost. And the only one who grounded me in these lifestyle choices I had made for myself was God. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved being a mom. I loved homeschooling, and I loved the freedom staying at home provided me. I could expand on my God-given gift, and I never took that for granted. I wrote and I helped others. I would write every spare moment I had, and I still do now. Writing is so much a part of me, as writing helped me to get to know God. I would study His Word and I would take notes, ask questions. I would write little commentaries for the public on the things God had already shared with me. But for my husband, this wasn't enough. He never saw the value of God's work through me, in me. He never valued the transformation God was working in me. And he became extremely distant, resentful, jealous. And this further put a wedge in between us that I was okay with. The first affair, I wasn't rooted in God. I wasn't writing about God. And my attention was all centered around my husband. So at the time of this first affair that I found out, it completely blindsided me. And I dealt with the pain emotionally myself as I reached out to my husband, but he was emotionally vacant. And being isolated from friends and family, I had no one to comfort me. And I was a wreck. I was slipping quickly into depression. And I embraced it. But God helped, and I give Him all the credit. This affair challenged my worth. I questioned who I was as a wife, a mother, and as a woman. I suppose this is natural because your significant partner is supposed to be the closest to you. You can't get any closer to someone than sharing your body with them. And in sharing, there is a natural closeness, an emotional intimacy. In reflection, I am reminded that I longed for that closeness. But closeness was something I never had with my husband, nor with anyone. Sure, we had sex, but that's all it was. I was making our intimacy, our physical intimacy, something more than what it ever was meant to be. I wanted more, I desired more, because I thought if I had the closeness of my husband in physical intimacy, I would have his loyalty. When I was faced with a second affair that I knew of, oh yeah, I was hurt. I was more angry. And I understood that the behavior of my husband was not my challenge to own. So I didn't own it. But I didn't handle the situation appropriately either. I did seek out revenge. And although it felt really good at the time, I did my revenge in secret. After it was said and done, I didn't feel any better. I felt worse because I stooped to a low that was unbecoming of God's child. Okay, God, you brought this to my attention. Surely you have a way to get me out of this, is what I said, calling out to God in prayer. That was the day, 3 years ago, when my shift began. A shift in perspective and attitude about myself and about God. It, for me, was a shift of a lifetime. When my husband came to me this past summer in 2017, saying, not asking, but saying, and telling me that he wanted a divorce, I understood. I knew this was coming, as we had not been intimate for 3 years and we barely talked. We barely communicated. He never apologized for his affairs. And he actually tried to put the blame on me. I can say that I want to honestly say that I never saw the affairs coming. I had gut feelings, and I ignored them, as most of us do. I had no proof, and I was always accused by him of having an affair, so I used that as an excuse to not deal with the emotional pain and put that on him and accuse him without proof. The things we tell ourselves to convince ourselves of a lie so we don't have to feel uncomfortable. What we tell ourselves is not truth. It's excuse to avoid the reality. I knew the one reason behind someone's jealousy was projection. I'm trained in peer support counseling, and I had helped enough people in my volunteer career to know more about human nature than most people. And I'm not bragging about it. I've always been fascinated with human nature, and yet I didn't allow that training to reflect and take that inward and look upon myself. Most of us don't, because we're scared of what we might find. I allowed myself to become ignorant to the things I knew and apply them to me. Why? My life was somewhat fulfilling, so I thought, but I unknowingly allowed myself to become complacent and ignore the warning signs that began before I married my husband. I allowed this to happen to myself. And as much as I wanted to lay blame, God showed me things that at one time I would not want to hear. Now, this is something that I have learned, that maturity comes with effort and a willingness to see the areas of your life that need change. God cannot fix in us what we cannot see that needs changing. And if we are faced with the challenge to change before we are ready, we become offended. We are broken. We may not want to admit that to ourselves, but we just need to look around ourselves to see this. And when we are willing to look inwardly, God will reveal the things in us that keep us from truly knowing Him. We are works in progress. So don't be so hard on yourself. If you stay committed to Him and His help, you will achieve greatness that you never thought was ever achievable. It just takes time, coated with lots of effort. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, I enjoy life. I always have. I'm always the one to find the fun and funny in everything. I love to laugh. I know when to be serious, but I don't take life so seriously because negativity will bring you down. And when it came to my marriage, I enjoyed being married. I enjoyed living the family life. I enjoyed feeling and giving that sense of love that I thought I had and thought I knew. But in reflection, I really wasn't enjoying my marriage at all. Sure, in my own small world, personally I was, but I wasn't giving of myself in a way that allowed me to enjoy life with my family. We were a family in name only. The love that was supposed to be a contribution to the family was never there. I enjoyed life so much more when my husband wasn't around. And when he was around, he didn't want to enjoy life with us. He didn't want to go swimming. He didn't want to do family things together. If it put him out and made him uncomfortable, he didn't want to do it. And so I just fell into that trap of, there's no money anyways, so what's the point? When my husband wasn't around, I could be myself, and I could be the mom that I always wanted to be. And I could reflect the love that I had to give onto our daughter. When my husband came home after 2 weeks away at work, my life was no longer my own, and I catered to him even when I was pursuing God. While my husband was away, I would write. When our daughter went to bed, I would write all night long. This is how I published books. And I would write into the morning, sometimes all day and all night, and I wouldn't sleep for days. At times I couldn't stop. I didn't want to. But all that time spent with God, that went by the wayside when my husband came home. He came home sex-starved and wanting to relax with a quote-unquote good movie that was violent and worldly. And he just wanted to kick back and take it easy. I felt like I had to cater to that. We never went anywhere as a family. Sure, we did some things together. But again, like I said, money was always scarce. And my husband was never home long enough for camping trips, and vacations were out of the question because the money that we did have in surplus was spent on his things. If you know anything about narcissism, you will know the financial ruin a narcissist leaves behind. And I'm not here to slam my husband. I'm just here to call out the facts. Because in getting real with yourself and your situation and the people around you, you can become real with yourself and get honest with yourself. And take a look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm not so great after all. I need some work. I catered to my husband even while I was pursuing God. And it seemed like I, as a wife, a woman, an individual, was put on the back burner when my husband was home, and I allowed it. But when I was in God's presence, I was allowed to do and be all that I wanted to be. Why was I so divided in my heart? 3 years ago, God began to answer all my questions. He answered them in a way that helped me develop me. The answers didn't come overnight, as they began a slow progression. And they started off as realizations about the challenges that I was facing. The biggest issue about myself was that I was in a narcissistic relationship. I couldn't see it because I had been imprinted with a behavioral pattern that was reactionary to it all my life. Now, these behavioral patterns I expressed were the only methods I knew of coping, and that is the same for you. We learn how to just get by. We learn how to not rock the boat, to not cause waves, to just love people enough so that they will see the value in me perhaps, but not to test them or challenge them. These are choices we make for ourselves, and choices that we make by instinct, but choices we make nevertheless. The choices I brought into my life brought me the outcome of pain, and that itself dictated to me my worth. The negative outcomes validated what I had always felt inside about myself. Now, I didn't feel negative about myself because I covered it up with joyfulness and happiness and positivity. I never allowed myself to retreat into, gee, I hate myself, or gee, I'm so stupid and dumb. I never allowed that to happen. I never allowed myself to go to that place. But my choices in life dictated to the opposite of what I was acting, of what I thought I felt. See, there's a conflict there. I convinced myself I liked me, and I did, and I still do. But I also convinced myself to never achieve better for myself because that is selfish and unloving. Why? Why do we do this to ourselves? The reasons why we make the choices we do, the reasons why we allow people to treat us the way that they do, and the reasons why we fail to achieve the goals that we want is tied up together in a simple yet powerful truth that cements all that we set out to believe. Rejection. Rejection is easy to do, but it is harder to let go of. That's because our lives are rooted deeply in rejection. Jesus says, I will not leave you nor forsake you. I was afraid my husband didn't like me. And I knew he didn't. I was a parent with our dating life. And if my husband didn't like me, then that meant he didn't want me. Now, looking in retrospect of our dating life, I could tell he was insecure and afraid to marry me. We pursued each other. He kept letting me go and breaking up with me. And he always came back. And I allowed him to come back. And when he came back, there was a period of, this golden period of the relationship where everything would be fine and I would cater to him to prove to him I was worthy, to prove to him that he should never let me go again. It was easier to be the person he wanted me to be than to be the person I desired to be. Because in searching for that girl inside, I knew that I would have to let him go for good. I wasn't ready to be rejected. But when I was ready to be rejected by him, I did let go of my husband. I tossed care to the wind and I gave God my all. There was no more of this family division in my heart. But that came 10 years later. God got all my attention when I wrote, and soon when my husband came home from work, the 4 days that we spent together, I began spending them with Jesus. I began maintaining my lifestyle that I had when my husband was away at work. Only now when he was at home, I felt good. But it felt odd because I wanted my husband to see the value in what I was doing. I wanted him to see the value of what it means to search God and search his love and apply his love to your heart, and how free and loving and good Jesus felt. Now, for a time, my husband was excited. He didn't complain and didn't resent the time that I was spending away from him. he encouraged me to spend time with Jesus. And for a time, he listened to my stories and commentaries and the things that I researched and learned. Then he half listened. And then he stopped listening altogether, and resentment and jealousy entered in his heart. And I remained true to my faith, true to myself, true to my spirit. My life had changed too much and too drastically to turn back. And it had changed too much and too drastically for my husband. He could not keep up, and he didn't want to. I, for him, was showing him rejection, as I became the person he never knew. With this new personal growth, I began to understand deep pains within me. I became challenged to allow God to uproot these things in me without my husband's help. And I had gone to my husband for emotional support before, but in knowing what I know about narcissism, my husband cannot be anyone other than who he was meant to be. And it is what it is. Emotional vacancy is a narcissist's strong point. I today have no anger and no pain, and I am not speaking in a way to point the finger at him. And this is not slander by any means. I am thankful for the experience because it was all God-led and God-centered, even if I didn't know this was so at the time. But again, I asked God the question, why? Why was I in a loveless marriage for 16 years? Why did I allow myself to become lost in someone else's ideal about who they thought I should be? Why did I feel rejected and respond to that in a way that was not authentic, and I allowed myself to become devalued? Now, these choices I made for myself. God allowed for them to be used to validate who I was to become for him, not for me. Whatever we are struggling with in life, negative people and negative situations, we have made the choice because we choose wrongly for ourselves. We look too much to the here and now and negotiate long-term principles later. We choose for ourselves based on feeling, abandoning our thought processes that allow us to see reason. We choose for ourselves based on the wounds of our heart in attempt to appease the heart's long-forgotten scars. We become so in tune to these so-called problem-solving decisions that we do not see that our decisions are what is causing the problem. However, because we live for God, God allows our choices to happen because he knows something we do not. Everything will balance itself out because in life everything must have a balance. Choice is made from the realm of fear and rejection, and it is from our panic-driven choices that God allows change to happen. We can't have the good without experiencing the bad, and we can't have the bad without experiencing the good. It's all relative. And it is all for his greater plan. And this plan is for us personally. Where once we made choices out of fear and rejection, God will turn it around where we eventually will make choices out of love and acceptance. Experiencing the hardships must bring you to a place of understanding that allows you to choose for yourself wisely. The journey to get there is long and anything but easy, but thankfully we are not alone. God is as close as his name. How do you want God to help you? Most oftentimes we want God to wave his hand over our lives and just make all the bad go away. I've asked God to take away the problem areas of my life too. I've even turned to God and asked him to change the heart of my husband whenever I felt like I was wronged and deserved an apology. God never took sides and in fact always showed me the error of my ways, not just in that particular area of need, but in all aspects of my life. God reveals our hypocrisy so that we can live kinder and gentler in the moments that challenge our emotional well-being. The key is to not get so above ourselves to assume that we are beyond correction. One day I turned to God in prayer, discouraged and questioned why it always seemed like I always had to be the one to apologize when whatever happened didn't seem like it was my fault. God's answer was short and sweet. He said this to me, "Because you can." Now, I never really understood this until God began working on healing and distancing my heart of all things narcissism. But in understanding the unchangeable aspects of narcissism, I began to understand more about myself and where I fit in the unchangeable aspects of God. We all have the ability to change. It is just a matter of wanting to. While we may want to, we don't always know how. This brings about a self-defeatist attitude. But with God, where there is a will, there is a way. I admit I was taken back with what God had said to me. I didn't understand what he meant fully, and I ignored this challenge and continued on with my studies with God. With my growing faith in God, I began to observe my environment around me. I began to see things as how they are, and not how I imagined them to be, in a way that led me around with blinders on my eyes. When I began to see the change in me, I began to see how less the things around me changed with me. But they stayed the same. And these things that stay the same are the very things that stand against us. I saw this within my marriage too. I began to change, and instead of coming with me and enjoying the goodness of God's word together, my husband stayed the same. He did not see the need in himself to change, and didn't. The distance between us became a great divide, and while we were civil to each other, we barely talked to one another. I stopped hanging on to the words he said and hung on to every word of God. I changed my habits, my behavior, and with that, the things I once was passionate about became a conviction in me to take a stand against for God. It felt good to walk in his light, but little did I know that more change was needed in order for me to truly see the light. Stay tuned for chapter 2.